The most feared name in Seoul's underworld was currently sobbing into his hands at a cemetery in Gangnam, his Valentino suit soaked through with rain and mud, his shoulders shaking with the kind of grief that destroys kingdoms. It was a paradox that would have seemed impossible to anyone who knew Kang Junseok by reputation alone. He was the man who'd unified 3 rival syndicates through calculated brutality, who negotiated treaties with blood and silenced dissent with a single cold glance. Yet here, in the suffocating quiet of the private cemetery, stripped of his lieutenants and his empire, he was simply a husband whose heart had been ripped from his chest. The funeral procession had dispersed hours ago, the black Mercedes sedans and stone-faced soldiers fading into the gray mist, leaving him alone with the unbearable reality of the headstone. The marble was cold, polished to a mirror sheen, bearing the photograph of Cynthia Morgan, the woman whose smile had been his only sanctuary in a world built on violence. Below her image were dates that marked a life far too short, a life that had been vibrant and full of laughter just days ago. The scent of white chrysanthemums, heavy and cloying, hung in the rain-soaked air, mocking him with their funeral perfection. Junseok traced the engraved letters of her name with trembling fingers, his knuckles white, his breath coming in ragged gasps that tore at his throat. He had survived assassination attempts, federal investigations, and gang wars that painted the streets red, but he could not survive this. The doctors had called it sudden cardiac arrest, a freak medical tragedy that no amount of money or power could have prevented. But his instincts, sharpened by decades of navigating betrayal, whispered otherwise. Cynthia had been healthy, radiant, alive with a light that balanced his darkness. To lose her so suddenly felt like a punishment for the sins he had committed to build his throne. He pressed his forehead against the cold stone, the dampness seeping into his skin, and let out a sound that echoed off the surrounding monuments, a guttural cry of pure, unfiltered anguish. He did not care about dignity. He did not care if the ancestors were watching. Without Cynthia, the empire he controlled was nothing but ashes and blood. He whispered to the earth, his voice breaking. It should have been me. 당신이 아니라 나였어야 했어. The wind picked up, rustling the dead leaves around him, sounding like 1,000 whispering voices, but none of them answered. He was alone in a world that had suddenly lost all its color, leaving only shades of gray and the black void of his sorrow. 70 meters away, concealed within the dense shadow of an ancient ginkgo tree, a woman watched the scene unfold with a hand pressed violently over her mouth to stifle a sob. She was dressed in a black peacoat and baseball cap, indistinguishable from any other distant mourner, but she had not left. Cynthia Morgan was not in the coffin beneath the earth. She was standing on trembling legs, her heart shattering as she watched the strongest man she had ever known crumble. Seeing Junseok this way, broken and defenseless and raw, tore at her soul more than her own near-death had. For the last 48 hours, she had believed he was the one who ordered her killed. The poison had tasted like bitter almonds beneath the bergamot of her morning tea, a creeping paralysis that locked her muscles while her mind screamed in terror. She had heard the voices as she lay frozen, unable to move or breathe, as they prepared her body for the morgue. She had heard the conspirators laughing, discussing how easy it was to remove the foreigner who distracted the boss, how a black woman had no place in a Korean empire. But she had been saved by a miracle, a debt repaid by Dr. An, the coroner who owed her his daughter's life. He had recognized the toxin, falsified the death certificate, and injected the antidote just moments before the embalming began. She had woken gasping in his basement clinic, alive but officially buried. She had stayed hidden, terrified, convinced that Junseok had tired of her, that he had chosen power over love. But now, witnessing his agony, the truth washed over her with the force of a tidal wave. He didn't know. He wasn't the architect of her destruction. He was its primary victim. The realization brought a surge of relief that was immediately swallowed by cold, sharp terror. If Junseok didn't kill her, then the people closest to him did, people he trusted with his life, people who had likely stood beside him at the funeral just hours ago, offering condolences with hands stained in her blood. She gripped the rough bark of the tree, her fingernails digging in until they broke. She wanted to run to him, to scream his name, to pull him up from the mud and tell him she was alive. But to reveal herself now in the open would be a death sentence for them both. The killers were watching, waiting for his grief to make him careless, so they could slide a knife between his ribs and take the throne. She had to stay dead a little while longer. She had to become the ghost they feared. Cynthia's eyes, usually warm and full of light, hardened into something cold and unforgiving. She adjusted her cap, turning her gaze from her weeping husband to the distant skyline where their enemies were celebrating, and a dangerous resolve settled into her bones. The rain had stopped, but Junicer remained on his knees, his body folded over the grave as if he could physically will himself into the earth with her. His hands, which had broken men and signed death warrants without trembling, now shook as they clawed at the wet soil, mud caking beneath his fingernails. The perfectly tailored suit that had cost more than most people earned in a year was ruined, streaked with dirt and grass stains, but he didn't notice. He didn't care. 3 days. It had been 3 days since the world stopped making sense. 3 days since he'd walked into their bedroom and found her on the floor, lips blue, eyes vacant. 3 days since the paramedics had worked on her body while he stood frozen, a king rendered powerless in his own palace. The doctors had used words like sudden, unpredictable, nothing you could have done, but those words were meaningless. He had built an empire on the principle that everything could be controlled, that enough money and fear could bend reality itself. Yet he couldn't save the one person who mattered. His shoulders heaved with silent sobs now, the kind that came from somewhere deeper than the lungs, somewhere primal and unreachable. He had not cried at the funeral. He had stood stone-faced as hundreds of people offered empty condolences, as his lieutenants watched him with calculating eyes, measuring his weakness. But here, alone with her name carved in granite, the dam finally broke. "I would burn it all down," he whispered in Korean, his voice raw and broken. "Every building, every deal, every alliance. I would trade it all to hear you laugh one more time." From her position behind the ginkgo tree, Cynthia felt her knees buckle. She caught herself against the trunk, bark biting into her palm. This was worse than the poison. Worse than waking up in a morgue drawer. Watching him fall apart was like watching her own heart being torn out through her chest. She had prepared herself for many possibilities when she decided to come here. She'd imagined he might show up with another woman already on his arm, proving the conspirators right that she'd been nothing but a temporary distraction. She'd imagined cold indifference, a performance of grief for the cameras before returning to business as usual. She had even imagined relief. But this raw, devastating collapse of a man who looked like he wanted to dig his own grave beside hers? This rewrote everything she thought she knew. A sob escaped her throat before she could stop it, muffled behind her hand but audible in the cemetery's heavy silence. Juniceo's head snapped up, his eyes wild and red-rimmed, scanning the tree-line like a predator scenting prey. For one terrible, electric moment, Cynthia thought he'd seen her. His gaze swept past her hiding spot once, twice, searching for the source of the sound. But then his face crumpled again, and he returned to the headstone, pressing his forehead against her photograph as fresh tears carved tracks through the dirt on his face. Cynthia pressed harder against her mouth, tasting blood, and forced herself to stay hidden even as every fiber of her being screamed to run to him. The memory came to Cynthia in fragments, sharp-edged and merciless, as she watched Junice weep 70 meters away. She closed her eyes against the present and fell back into that morning, 4 days ago, when her world had tilted sideways and never righted itself. It had started like any other Thursday. Junice had left before dawn for a meeting in Busan, kissing her forehead and murmuring promises to be home by dinner. She'd wandered downstairs in her silk robe around 9, barefoot on the heated marble floors of their Hanamdong penthouse, craving the Earl Grey tea that their housekeeper, Mrs. Choi, always prepared perfectly. The cup had been waiting for her on the breakfast table, steam rising in delicate curls, beside a plate of fresh fruit and the morning paper. She should have known. Mrs. Choi always brought the tea to wherever Cynthia was. Never left it waiting. But Cynthia had been distracted, scrolling through her phone, reading an article about a gallery opening she wanted to attend. She'd lifted the cup to her lips, inhaled the familiar bergamot, and taken 3 long sips before she tasted it. That faint bitterness underneath, like almonds mixed with metal. Her hand had frozen halfway to setting the cup down. The room had suddenly felt too bright, too sharp, every sound amplified. She'd opened her mouth to call for help, but her tongue had gone thick and useless. The cup had slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble in an explosion of porcelain and liquid that seemed to happen in slow motion. Then her legs had given out. She'd collapsed beside the table, her body hitting the floor hard enough that she should have felt pain, but there was nothing. No sensation. No control. Her eyes were open, frozen in position, staring at the ceiling as her lungs struggled to pull in air. She couldn't blink, couldn't scream, couldn't even twitch a finger. But she could hear everything. Footsteps had approached, quick and purposeful. Mrs. Choi's face had appeared above her, and for one desperate moment Cynthia had thought she'd come to help. Then she'd seen the woman's expression, cold and calculating, checking Cynthia's pulse with clinical detachment. "She's gone," Mrs. Choi had said, and Cynthia's mind had screamed in protest. I'm right here, I'm alive, help me, please help me." Another voice, male, one she recognized as Director Beck, Junesio's head of security. "You're certain the dosage was correct? We can't have her waking up." "She won't wake up. Tetrodotoxin mimics death perfectly. By the time they get her to the morgue, it'll be real." Mrs. Choi's voice had been matter-of-fact, discussing murder like a grocery list. "Good. The boss has been distracted long enough. A foreign wife, a black woman in our organization, it makes us look weak. The old families are restless. This needed to happen." Cynthia had felt them lift her body, felt the sensation of movement even though she couldn't respond to it. The paralysis was complete, a prison of her own flesh. They'd placed her on something soft, a couch perhaps, and she'd heard Mrs. Choi making frantic phone calls, performing grief like a seasoned actress. "Mrs. Kong, she's not breathing, please hurry, I don't know what happened, she just collapsed." The ambulance had come. The paramedics had worked on her still body, shocking her heart, pumping her chest, while her consciousness floated somewhere above the scene, trapped and screaming silently. She'd heard them call the time, heard the doctor's solemn declaration, heard them zip the body back. The morgue had been cold, sterile, terrifying. She'd been placed on a metal table, and through her frozen eyes she'd seen the fluorescent lights above, heard the sounds of other bodies being processed nearby. This was it. This was how she would die, awake and aware as they cut into her or burned her or whatever came next. Then a different voice, older, uncertain. "Wait. This one, I know her. Dr. On." She'd met him 2 years ago at a charity event Junesio had hosted. His daughter had gotten involved with loan sharks, desperate and drowning in debt. Cynthia had quietly paid it off, no questions asked, no favors expected. The girl had been 16. Cynthia hadn't wanted Junesio to know because she'd feared he'd handle it with violence. Dr. On's face had appeared above her, his eyes widening. No, this isn't right." His fingers had found her neck, pressing in a different spot than the paramedics had checked. Her pupils, the rigidity, the way she's positioned. "This is tetrodotoxin poisoning. She's not dead. She's paralyzed." She'd felt the needle pierce her arm, felt the antidote burning through her veins like liquid fire. And then, after what felt like hours but was probably minutes, her finger had twitched. Air had rushed into her lungs in a painful, gasping sob. Dr. On had leaned close, his voice urgent and low. "They think you're dead. If I report this, whoever poisoned you will try again, and next time they'll make sure. You need to stay dead, at least for now. Do you understand?" She'd managed the smallest nod, and he'd made his choice. Falsified paperwork. A substitute body. A midnight extraction in a bag meant for medical waste. Now, standing in the cemetery watching her husband shatter, Cynthia understood the full weight of that choice. She'd let him believe she was gone to save her own life. But looking at him now, she wondered if she'd saved anything at all, or just relocated the death from her body to his soul. The conference room on the 42nd floor of the Kong Holdings Tower was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering sprawl of Seoul, a kingdom laid out for those powerful enough to claim it. The table was black marble, the chairs Italian leather, and the men sitting in them were predators who'd clawed their way to the top of the city's most ruthless organization. Director Beck sat at the head of the table, a position that should have belonged to Kong Junesio. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with silver threading through his hair and eyes like flint. He'd been with the syndicate for 30 years, had served Junesio's father before him, and believed with absolute conviction that loyalty to the organization trumped loyalty to any individual, even the boss. "He hasn't shown his face in 4 days," said Kim Min-jun, the youngest of the group at 38, responsible for their operations in Gangnam. He adjusted his Rolex with manicured fingers. 4 days. In the middle of negotiations with the Incheon crew. "Do you know what that makes us look like?" "Weak," said Director Beck, the word falling like a stone. "It makes us look weak." Park Sung-ho, head of their financial operations, leaned back in his chair and lit a cigarette despite the no-smoking policy. No one corrected him. "I heard he's been at the cemetery every day, sometimes for hours, just sitting there talking to a headstone." He exhaled smoke with visible contempt. The King of Seoul reduced to a grieving widow. "It's pathetic," Min-jun agreed, warming to the topic. "And it's dangerous. The old families are already whispering. The Busan crew is making moves on our territory in Itaewon. They smell blood in the water." Choi Dae-sung, their head of enforcement and the most brutal of the group, cracked his knuckles methodically. He was a mountain of a man, with scars that told stories he never needed to repeat. Maybe he needed this. A reminder that the world doesn't stop because he's sad. Maybe we should pay him a visit, help him remember who he is. "That's not the problem," Director Beck said, his voice cutting through the chatter. The room fell silent. When Beck spoke, people listened. "The problem isn't that he's grieving. The problem is what he was grieving for." The distinction hung in the air, heavy with implication. Park Sung-ho stepped out his cigarette. "You mean the wife?" "I mean the foreign wife," Beck corrected, his tone sharp. "A Black American woman with no family connections, no strategic value, no understanding of our world. He married her because he loved her." The word dripped with disdain. "Love. As if that's a currency that matters in our business." Min-jun nodded vigorously. "My father always said Junesio's weakness would be his sentimentality. The old boss, his father, never would have allowed such a marriage. It made us look soft, like we were trying to be Western cosmopolitan." He practically spat the last word. "The traditional families never accepted it. Half our allies thought it was an insult." "She was a distraction," Beck continued, standing now, pacing to the windows. Seoul glittered beneath him like a jewel box. Every decision he made in the last 3 years was filtered through her. He turned down the casino deal in Macau because she said it was too dirty. Too dirty. He laughed, a harsh sound. "As if we built this empire on clean money." He softened our approach to the Filipino syndicate because she asked him to consider the humanitarian angle. Humanitarian. Choi Dae-sung's jaw tightened. "I lost good men because of that softness. The Filipinos took our mercy for weakness and hid our warehouse in Pyeongtaek. 6 of my soldiers died because the boss wanted to make his wife happy." "Exactly," Beck said, turning to face them. "And now she's gone, and instead of returning to form, instead of hardening back into the leader we need, he's falling apart. Which means the rot went deeper than we thought. She didn't just distract him. She fundamentally changed him." Park Sung-ho lit another cigarette. "So what are you proposing?" The question everyone had been circling finally landed in the center of the table. Beck was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. I'm proposing that the organization is bigger than any one man. Even Kong Junesio. His father built this syndicate on the principle that nothing, not family, not love, not sentiment, comes before the survival and prosperity of the whole. Junesio has forgotten that principle. You want to remove him, Minjun said, his voice barely above a whisper. I want to save the organization, Beck corrected. If he can pull himself together, prove he's still the man we need, then there's no problem. But if he continues like this, wallowing in grief, making us vulnerable. He let the sentence hang. Choi Dae-sung leaned forward, his massive hands flat on the marble table. And if we decide he can't recover? What then? Beck's smile was cold and certain. Then we do what we've always done when a leader becomes a liability. We remove the liability and install someone stronger. Someone who understands that in our world, love is a luxury we cannot afford. The men around the table exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. Ambition flickered in their eyes like candle flames. The Incheon negotiations are in 3 days, Park Sung-ho said slowly. Dangerous meeting. Lots of security concerns. Things could go wrong. Beck nodded, returning to his seat at the head of the table. Things could indeed go wrong. Tragic, really, if something happened to our grieving boss while his judgment is compromised. He looked at each man in turn. But the organization would survive. It always does. Minjun raised his glass of whiskey. To the organization. The others raised their glasses in unison, a toast that sounded like a eulogy. To the organization, they echoed and drank to the death of their king. Junesio returned to the penthouse as the sun was setting, painting Seoul in shades of blood and gold. He moved through the space like a ghost himself, barely registering the familiar surroundings that now felt like a mausoleum. Everything here carried her fingerprints, her choices, her light. The cream-colored throw pillows she'd insisted would soften the stark black leather furniture. The small succulent garden by the window that she'd tended every Sunday morning. The framed photograph of them in Jeju, laughing at something he could no longer remember. He'd avoided the bedroom for 3 days, sleeping on the couch when exhaustion finally dragged him under. But tonight something pulled him toward it. Maybe it was the need to torture himself further, to breathe in the space where she'd last been alive. He pushed open the door and was immediately hit with the absence of her scent, replaced now by the sterile smell of the cleaning service that had come through. They'd stripped the bed, removed her clothes from where she draped them over the chair, erased the casual chaos of her presence. His hands curled into fists. He should have told them not to touch anything. Should have preserved it exactly as she'd left it, a shrine to the last morning she'd drawn breath. The meeting in Incheon loomed in 2 days. Director Beck had called 17 times. His lieutenants were circling like sharks, their patience wearing thin with his absence. They didn't understand. They couldn't. They'd built their lives on power and control and violence, but none of them had ever found the one thing that made all of that meaningless. Junesio grabbed his keys from the dresser, suddenly needing to move, to drive, to outrun the suffocating weight of the penthouse. He took the private elevator down to the underground garage where his collection of vehicles sat in climate-controlled silence. He chose the Maybach, the one Cynthia had loved because the seats were heated, and it played her music through speakers that cost more than some cars. The moment he opened the door, it hit him. Jasmine and vanilla. Her perfume. Jo Malone, the specific blend she'd ordered custom from London. The scent was unmistakable, recent, hanging in the air of the car's interior like she just stepped out moments ago. Junesio froze, 1 foot in the car, his hand gripping the door frame so hard his knuckles went white. His heart, which had been beating with mechanical regularity for days, suddenly hammered against his ribs. The garage was locked. Biometric access only. His fingerprint, his retinal scan. No one could get in here. No one had been in this car since the last time he'd driven Cynthia to her gallery event, 6 days before she died. He slid into the driver's seat, his hands trembling, and inhaled deeply. It was there. Real. Not a hallucination born of grief. Her scent, as vivid as if she were sitting beside him. "I'm losing my mind," he whispered to the empty car. But even as he said it, his instincts, the ones that had kept him alive through 2 decades of gang warfare, screamed that something else was happening. Something impossible. He started the engine, and the sound system came to life automatically. But instead of resuming the news podcast he'd been listening to, music filled the car. Not just any music. La Vie en Rose by Louis Armstrong, the version Cynthia had discovered in some vintage record shop in Itaewon. She'd played it on repeat for weeks, humming along while she painted in her studio, swaying in the kitchen while she attempted to cook Korean food that always ended in laughter and delivery orders. It was the song he danced with her to in their living room at 2 in the morning, both of them slightly drunk on wine, her head on his shoulder, her voice soft against his neck. "This song makes me feel like the world is beautiful," she'd said. "Like even in your dark world we found something pure." Junesio's breath came in sharp gasps. He hadn't played this song since her death. Couldn't bear to. And it wasn't on any playlist, wasn't queued up anywhere. His phone was connected via Bluetooth, but when he grabbed it from his pocket, the screen showed nothing playing. Yet the music continued, Ella Fitzgerald's voice now. Another version Cynthia had loved. His hand shook as he checked the car system. No USB drive. No CD. The song was simply playing as if summoned from nowhere. "Cynthia," he breathed, and his voice cracked on her name. He sat there for 20 minutes, listening to song after song, each one a memory, each one something only she would have chosen. At Last by Etta James. The Nearness of You by Norah Jones. Wonderful Tonight by Eric Clapton, which she'd mockingly told him was cheesy but had made her cry anyway. When the music finally stopped, the car fell into silence so complete it rang in his ears. Junesio stared at the steering wheel, his mind racing through possibilities, each one more impossible than the last. Ghosts didn't exist. The dead didn't return. But the perfume lingered, and the songs had played, and every rational explanation his strategic mind tried to construct crumbled under the weight of what he'd just experienced. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to his messages, to the thread with Cynthia's number that he hadn't been able to delete. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. What did you say to the dead? What did you say when impossible things happened in locked cars? Instead of typing, he pressed the voice memo function and spoke into the phone, his voice raw. "If you can hear this, if somehow you're there, I need you to know something. I would burn this entire city down to have you back. Every building, every alliance, every piece of this empire means nothing without you. This is my mind breaking, fine. Let it break. But if it's something else, if there's any chance." He stopped, his throat closing. "Give me a sign. Please. I can't do this without knowing." He sent the voice memo to her number, knowing it would disappear into the void, knowing dead phones didn't receive messages. But as his finger hit send, his phone buzzed in his hand. A text message. From Cynthia's number. His vision tunneled. The garage spun. The message contained only 2 words, but they detonated in his chest like a bomb. "I'm here." Junesio's phone slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor. His breathing stopped. The world stopped. Everything he understood about reality fractured and reformed around those 2 words glowing on the screen. She was here. Or he was insane. Or something far more dangerous was happening, and he'd just become the most vulnerable he'd ever been in his entire life. Junesio didn't sleep that night. He sat in the Maybach in the underground garage until dawn, staring at the 2 words on his phone screen until his eyes burned and the letters blurred. "I'm here." He tried calling the number 43 times. Each call went straight to voicemail, to Cynthia's voice telling him to leave a message, a recording that now felt like both torture and proof. He'd sent 17 messages. Questions, pleas, demands. None of them were answered. But those 2 words remained, glowing evidence that something was happening beyond the edges of his understanding. By the time the sun rose over Seoul, something had shifted in Junesio's chest. The crushing weight of grief hadn't disappeared, but it had transmuted into something sharper, more focused. If she was alive, then someone had taken her from him. If she was dead and this was her ghost, then the boundary between worlds was thinner than he'd believed. Either way, he was no longer the broken man weeping at a gravestone. He was a hunter who'd just caught the scent of prey. He spent the day mobilizing resources with manic precision. He pulled security footage from every camera within a 2-kilometer radius of the penthouse. He had his tech specialist, a genius hacker named Lee who owed him several lifetimes of favors, trace every signal that had pinged near Cynthia's phone number in the last 72 hours. He interviewed the cleaning staff, the building security, anyone who'd had access to the garage or the penthouse. Nothing. Every lead dissolved into vapor. By evening, Junesio was operating on pure adrenaline and the fumes of obsession. He needed to move, to hunt, to do something other than sit in the penthouse waiting for ghosts to text him. So he returned to the cemetery as the sky darkened and rain began to fall in cold sheets that turned the world gray and indistinct. He approached Cynthia's grave differently this time. Not with the shuffling gait of a broken man, but with the predatory awareness of someone who knew he was being watched. His eyes scanned the tree-line, the monuments, the shadows between the crypts. If she was here, if something was here, he would find it. The rain intensified, drumming against his shoulders, soaking through his wool coat. He knelt at the grave, but his posture was different now. Alert. Waiting. He placed his hand on the wet marble and spoke, his voice cutting through the rain. I know you're here. I don't understand how, I don't understand why, but I know. He paused, water streaming down his face. If you're alive, show yourself. If you're dead and somehow reaching me, then I need to know what you need. But don't hide from me. Not you. Never you. The cemetery remained silent except for the rain and the distant rumble of thunder. Junesio waited, counting his heartbeats, each one an eternity. Nothing moved in the shadows. He stood, frustration coiling in his gut like a living thing, and turned to leave. That's when he saw it. A flicker of movement near the ginkgo tree 70 meters away. A figure in dark clothing, barely visible against the trunk. His body moved before his mind caught up. He was running, his expensive shoes sliding on wet grass, his coat billowing behind him. The figure bolted, disappearing into the maze of monuments and crypts. Junso followed, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his heart hammering not with exertion but with desperate, wild hope. He caught a glimpse of the figure rounding a marble angel, saw the shape of a woman, the way she moved, graceful even in flight. Something about that movement was achingly familiar. The way she turned her shoulders, the length of her stride. Cynthia, he roared, his voice echoing off stone. Stop. Please. The figure paused at the cemetery gates, just for a second, silhouetted against the streetlights beyond. Junesio was 50 meters away, closing fast, his lungs burning. He could almost see her face, almost reach her. Then she was gone, slipping through the gates and into a black sedan that peeled away from the curb with professional precision. Junesio reached the street just in time to see the taillights disappear into Seoul's evening traffic. He stood there in the rain, chest heaving, and pulled out his phone to snap a photo of the receding vehicle. The license plate was a blur, but he'd seen the make and model. A Genesis G90 black with tinted windows. There were thousands in Seoul, but it was something. A thread to pull. His phone buzzed. Another text from Cynthia's number. Not yet. You're being watched. Trust no one. Junesio's head snapped up, scanning the street, the buildings, the cars passing by. Someone was watching him right now. The people who'd hurt Cynthia, who'd taken her, who were playing this sick game. His hand moved instinctively to the gun holstered at his lower back, hidden beneath his coat. A third text arrived. The Incheon meeting is a trap. They're going to kill you. Ice flooded his veins. The meeting. Director Beck had been insistent about it, unusually so. 3 rival crew leaders in one room, Beck had said. A chance to solidify their position while Junesio was vulnerable. He'd been too consumed with grief to question it. His fingers flew across the keyboard. Who's trying to kill me? The response came immediately. The ones closest to you. I'm getting proof. 2 more days. Stay alive. Junesio stared at the words as rain battered his face and shoulders. 2 more days. The meeting was tomorrow night. Someone in his inner circle, someone he trusted, had orchestrated Cynthia's death and was now moving to finish the job. A car slowed beside him. A black Audi with bulletproof windows. His security detail, headed by Choi Dae-sung's lieutenant. The window rolled down, revealing a concerned face. "Boss, are you all right? You're soaked. Let us drive you home." Junesio looked at the man, someone who'd been with him for 5 years, and wondered if he was looking at a traitor. "Trust no one," she'd said. "I'm fine," he replied, his voice flat and cold. "I'll drive myself." He walked back to where he'd left the Maybach, his mind already racing through scenarios, suspects, possibilities. The grief was still there, a constant ache in his chest, but it had been joined by something far more dangerous. Purpose. Clarity. The manic focus of a man who'd been given a reason to survive. Cynthia was alive. His wife was alive, and she was hunting the same people who were hunting him. He slid into the Maybach and pulled out his phone one more time, typing a single message. "I'll wait. But when you come back to me, we burn them all." The reply came as he started the engine. "Together." Junesio's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, something cold and sharp and utterly ruthless. The King of Soul had been on his knees, broken and vulnerable. That king was dead. What rose from the ashes was something far more dangerous. The call came at 11 in the morning. Director Beck's voice smooth and sympathetic through the phone speaker. Junesio sat in his home office, surrounded by security footage frozen on various screens, studying the faces of every person who'd entered his building in the past week. "Junesio, I know this is difficult," Beck began, using his given name with a familiarity that now felt like a warning sign. "But we need to discuss the Incheon meeting. The crews are getting restless. They see your absence as..." "Cancel it," Junesio said flatly. A pause. "I'm sorry. Cancel the Incheon meeting. Reschedule for next week." Another pause, longer this time. Junesio could almost hear the recalculation happening on the other end of the line. That's not possible. These men don't respond well to last-minute changes. It makes us look disorganized. Then they can wait. Junesio's eyes never left the screens. On one monitor, he watched Beck's car entering the parking garage 3 days ago, timestamp 3:47 a.m. What business brought his head of security to the building in the middle of the night? Junesio. Beck's tone shifted, taking on the quality of a father speaking to a troubled son. "I understand you're grieving. We all loved Cynthia. But you can't let this consume you. The organization needs its leader." The use of her name in Beck's mouth felt like desecration. Junesio's jaw tightened. "I said cancel it. I have a better idea." Beck's voice warmed, turning conciliatory. "What if we did something to honor her memory first? Before the meeting. A private ceremony, just the inner circle. There's a Buddhist temple in the mountains Yangjusa, about an hour outside the city. Beautiful, peaceful. We could have the monks perform a proper ceremony for her spirit. It might bring you closure, help you transition back to." "A temple ceremony," Junesio repeated, his voice carefully neutral. "Yes. Tomorrow evening before the Incheon meeting. We'll make an offering, say the proper prayers. Cynthia deserves that, doesn't she? A traditional ceremony, even if she wasn't Korean. It's what her spirit needs to rest." Junesio closed his eyes. The manipulation was almost artful. Appeal to his guilt, his love, his desire to honor her properly. A remote location. Evening timing. Limited witnesses. The monks could be paid off or simply kept away from the wrong sections of the temple grounds. It was exactly the trap Cynthia had warned him about. Who would attend? He asked. Just the core leadership. Myself, Park Sung-ho, Kim Min-jun, Choi Dae-sung. The men who've stood beside you for years. The ones who understand what she meant to you. Beck's voice dropped, becoming almost tender. We've all been worried about you, Juneseo. We want to help you through this. Through it or into the ground, Junso thought. What time? 7 o'clock. The temple is quiet then, no tourists. I've already spoken to the head monk. He's prepared to perform the ceremony. And after? We drive straight to Incheon. Exactly. Honor the dead, then handle the living. It's what Cynthia would want, isn't it? For you to be strong again. Junso let the silence stretch. Let Beck think he was considering it. Grieving widower being slowly persuaded. Finally he spoke, injecting just enough exhaustion into his voice. All right. Send me the address. Excellent. The relief in Beck's voice was palpable. This is the right choice, Juneseo. For you, for her memory, for all of us. I'll text you the location. And Juneseo? Come alone. No security detail. This should be intimate. Just brothers honoring a sister we've lost. Of course. No witnesses. No protection. Just a grieving man and the 4 people planning to put a bullet in his head. Understood, Junso said and ended the call. He sat motionless for 3 full minutes, staring at the screens, his mind working through angles and contingencies. Then his phone buzzed. A text from Cynthia's number. I heard. I have eyes on your office. Don't go. He typed back quickly. I have to. It's the only way to draw them out. They'll kill you. They'll try. A longer pause before her response came. Then I'm coming too. No. Too dangerous. You don't give me orders anymore. Not until you explain why Mrs. Choi had access to our home. Why Beck had keys to your private garage. Why you trusted vipers. The accusation stung because it was fair. He'd been blind, so focused on protecting her from external threats that he'd missed the rot festering inside his own organization. He typed carefully. I trusted the wrong people. I'm sorry, but I can't lose you again. Stay hidden. You won't lose me. But you're not doing this alone. Before he could respond, another text arrived, this one with an attachment. A photo. It showed director Beck and Park Sung-ho in what looked like a private room at an expensive restaurant, toasting with glasses of whiskey. The timestamp was from 5 days ago, the night after Cynthia's funeral. Both men were smiling. The next photo showed Choi Dae-sung handing an envelope to someone Juneseo recognized as a contact in the coroner's office. Mrs. Choi stood in the background. The third photo made his blood freeze. Kim Min-jun standing in the parking garage beside Juneseo's Maybach, holding something small in his hand. A bottle. The timestamp read 2:34 a.m., the night before Cynthia died. The perfume in your car, her text read. I put it there yesterday, but Min-jun had access. He planted something else before. I'm still trying to find out what. Juneseo's hands curled into fists. All 4 of them. His entire inner circle, the men he'd fought beside for years, had conspired to kill his wife. And now they were luring him to a temple to finish the job. He stood and walked to his private safe, entering the combination with steady hands. Inside was an arsenal carefully maintained and ready. He selected 2 handguns, a knife, and a Kevlar vest thin enough to hide under a dress shirt. His phone buzzed again. There's a service road behind the temple. I'll be there. Things go wrong, run for the trees. I'll cover you. You shouldn't have to cover me. You should be safe. We're past that now. Tomorrow at 7 we end this. Together. Juneseo looked at the weapon spread across his desk, then at the photos of his 4 lieutenants, men who'd shared meals at his table and now wanted him dead. He thought about Cynthia, alive and hiding in the shadows, hunting the same prey. He typed one final message. Together. But Cynthia? When this is over, when they're all dead, I need you to promise me something. What? Come home. Really home. No more hiding. No more watching from a distance. Come back to me. The reply took a full minute to arrive. Kill them first. Then we'll see if there's a home left to return to. It wasn't the promise he wanted, but it was honest. And honesty, even painful honesty, was more than he'd gotten from anyone else in days. Junessio began loading the guns with methodical precision. Tomorrow at 7, either he'd expose the traitors and reclaim his throne, or he'd die in a temple in the mountains. Either way, the waiting was almost over. The temple complex sat nestled in the mountains like a sleeping dragon, its curved roofs dark against the twilight sky. Junessio arrived at precisely 7 o'clock, his Maybach crunching over gravel as he pulled into the empty parking area. The main temple building glowed with warm light, but the grounds were eerily quiet. No monks visible, no other visitors. Just the sound of wind through pine trees and the distant call of evening birds. He'd worn the Kevlar vest under a black silk shirt and suit jacket. The guns were positioned at his lower back and ankle, the knife strapped to his forearm. He looked like a man coming to honor his dead wife. He was prepared to become death itself. Director Beck emerged from the temple entrance, arms spread in greeting. Junessio, thank you for coming. I know this wasn't easy. Junessio studied the older man's face, searching for signs of the betrayal he now knew lived there. Beck's expression was perfectly calibrated, sympathetic, warm, the mask of a mentor concerned for his protégé. 20 years of loyalty, just a thought. 20 years of standing beside my father, beside me. And all of it was a lie. Where are the others? Junessio asked. Inside, preparing the altar. Come. They walked through the main hall, past golden Buddha statues that seemed to watch with knowing eyes. The air was thick with incense, sandalwood and lotus, scents meant to purify and honor the dead. Junessio's hand brushed against the gun at his back. A whispered promise. The ceremony room was smaller, intimate, with a modest altar arranged with white chrysanthemums, fruit offerings, and a photograph of Cynthia that someone had pulled from the funeral. Seeing her face there, smiling in a picture taken at some happier time, sent a spike of rage through Junessio's chest so intense he had to force his breathing to steady. Park Sung-ho, Kim Min-jun, and Choi Dae-sung stood near the altar, their faces arranged in expressions of solemn respect. All 4 of them gathered in one room. All 4 conspirators who'd poisoned his wife, and now intended to finish the job. It's a beautiful altar, Junessio said quietly. Cynthia would have appreciated it. She always loved traditional ceremonies, even though she wasn't Korean. She had a good heart, Beck said, moving to stand beside the altar. It's tragic that she's gone, but we honor her tonight and then we move forward. The organization needs you whole again. Whole, Junessio repeated. He looked at each man in turn. Tell me something. When did you decide? When did you all decide that she had to die? The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. The mask slipped just slightly. Beck's smile faltered. Park Sung-ho's hand drifted toward his jacket. Choi Dae-sung's massive shoulders tensed. Junessio, Beck said carefully. What are you talking about? Tetrodotoxin, Junessio said, his voice like cut glass. Administered in her morning tea by Mrs. Choi, who reported directly to you, Director. A poison that mimics death so perfectly that even paramedics can be fooled. Very sophisticated. Very expensive. The kind of thing that requires planning, coordination, and access to my home. Kim Min-jun's hand was definitely moving toward his gun now. Boss, your grief is making you paranoid. The perfume in my car, Junessio continued, taking a step forward. The songs on my stereo. You thought you were so clever, planting evidence to make me think I was losing my mind. Make the boss unstable, make him vulnerable. Then bring him to a remote temple and put him down like a rabid dog. Enough, Beck's voice cracked like a whip. The pretense evaporated completely. His hand disappeared into his jacket and emerged with a pistol, aimed directly at Junessio's chest. You were always too soft. Your father knew it. I knew it. That woman made you weak. The other three drew their weapons in perfect synchronization. Four guns, for men who'd trained together for decades, all pointed at Junicio from different angles. A professional execution formation. She made me human, Junicio said. There's a difference. Not in our world, Choi Dae-sung rumbled. In our world, human gets you killed. Beck's finger tightened on the trigger. Goodbye, Junicio. For what it's worth, I did respect your father. The lights went out. Not flickering, not gradual but instant. Complete darkness that swallowed the room. The backup generators that should have kicked in remained silent. In the confusion, Junicio left, rolling behind a wooden pillar as gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes creating strobe-light chaos. What the hell? Minjun's voice panicked. Then the temple's PA system crackled to life, and a voice Junicio knew better than his own heartbeat filled the room. Hello, gentlemen. Cynthia's voice was cold, controlled, utterly calm. You look surprised. I suppose you would be, seeing as you murdered me 4 days ago. The gunfire stopped. In the darkness, Junicio could hear ragged breathing, confused movement. Impossible, Beck whispered. You're dead. We confirmed. You confirmed a body that wasn't mine. Dr. On sends his regards, by the way. His daughter says thank you for the college fund I set up for her. Turns out, kindness buys loyalty. You should try it sometime. A new light source activated. Not the room's main lights, but spotlights positioned at strategic angles, blinding the 4 traders while leaving Junicio in relative shadow. He moved silently, circling. The security system you're so proud of? Cynthia continued. I've had access for 6 months. Every camera, every lock, every light switch. You built this organization on technology and violence. I'm using both against you. Choi Dae-sung fired blindly toward where he thought the speakers were. The bullet embedded in wood, nowhere close to its target. Junicio down, Cynthia's voice snapped, and he dropped flat as the windows exploded inward. Not bullets but smoke canisters, filling the room with thick gray fog that made the spotlights diffuse into useless halos. Junicio moved through the chaos with the muscle memory of countless fights. He heard Park Sung-ho stumbling, coughing, and swept the man's legs out from under him, disarming him with brutal efficiency. A strike to the temple, and Sung-ho dropped unconscious. North window, Cynthia's voice came through an earpiece Junicio suddenly realized was in his ear. When had she? Min-jun 3 meters, you're 2 o'clock. He turned and saw the younger man's silhouette in the smoke. 2 shots center mass. Min-jun went down with a choked gasp. Junicio, move. He dove right as Choi's massive form crashed through where he'd been standing. The enforcer was fighting blind but fighting smart, staying low, sweeping in controlled arcs. I've got him, Cynthia said. A red laser dot appeared on Choi's forehead, visible even through the smoke. The big man froze. Hello, Choi. Cynthia's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. Remember when you said I was too soft for this world? I've been watching you for 3 days. I know you take the same route home every night. I know your daughter's school schedule. I know where your mother lives in Busan. Still think I'm soft. Choi's hand slowly raised. The gun fell from his fingers. That left Beck. Junicio turned, scanning the smoke, and saw the older man backing toward the exit, gun still drawn, eyes wild with something between rage and terror. 20 years, Beck spat. 20 years I kept this organization strong, and you threw it away for some foreign. The doors slammed shut, electronic locks engaging with a heavy click. You're not leaving, Cynthia said. None of you are. Not until my husband decides what happens next. The smoke began to clear, pulled out by ventilation she'd somehow activated. Emergency lights came on, bathing the scene in harsh white fluorescence. Park Sung-ho unconscious on the floor. Kim Min-jun bleeding out, still breathing but barely. Choi Dae-sung on his knees, hands behind his head. And Beck, trapped against the locked doors, his gun shaking in his grip. The side door opened and Cynthia stepped through. She was alive, real, terrifyingly beautiful in black tactical gear with a rifle slung over her shoulder, and a tablet in her hands controlling the entire temple's security grid. Her eyes found Junisio's across the room, and for one perfect moment, the world contained only the two of them. Then she looked at the four men who tried to kill her, and her expression hardened into something that would have made a stone weep. "Now," she said softly, "let's talk about what happens to people who underestimate the women in this family." Junisio crossed the room in 4 strides and pulled Cynthia into his arms with enough force that she gasped against his chest. The rifle clattered to the floor. His hands tangled in her hair, cupping her face, touching her shoulders, her back, every point of contact confirming that she was solid, warm, alive. "You're real," he breathed in Korean, then English, then Korean again, as if the languages themselves needed to verify the impossible. "당신은 살아있어. You're alive." "I'm real," she whispered back, her own hands gripping his jacket like she might fall if she let go. "I'm here. I'm so sorry you thought." He kissed her, deep and desperate and absolutely heedless of the 4 men watching. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. "We finished this first," he said, his voice rough. "Then you explain everything. Then I never let you out of my sight again. Deal?" She pulled back, her expression shifting from vulnerable wife to tactical operator in a heartbeat. She picked up the tablet, swiped through several screens. "The temple grounds are locked down. I've got control of all exits. The monks are genuine, by the way, but I paid them triple to take a meditation retreat in the southern building for the next 3 hours. No witnesses." Junisio turned to face the 4 traitors. Beck was still pressed against the locked doors, his gun now lowered but not dropped, his face cycling through shock, rage, and calculation. Choi remained on his knees, bleeding from a graze across his shoulder where Cynthia's warning shot had come closer than he'd realized. Park Sung-ho was starting to stir on the floor. Kim Minjun's breathing had gone shallow and wet. "Minjun needs a hospital," Cynthia said clinically, checking her tablet. "He's got maybe 20 minutes before he bleeds out internally. Then he has 20 minutes to talk," Junisio replied, walking to stand over the younger man. He crouched down, grabbed Minjun by the collar, and hauled him into a sitting position against the altar. Who else? Who else in the organization was part of this? Minjun's face was gray, sweat beading on his forehead. "Go to hell." Cynthia appeared at Junisio's shoulder. The tablet angled so Minjun could see the screen. It showed a live stream of a modest apartment in Gangnam. A woman sat on a couch watching television, unaware of the camera. Minjun's sister. "I can have someone there in 4 minutes," Cynthia said conversationally. "Your choice how this goes." "You're bluffing," Minjun gasped. "You're not like us. You're soft, you don't." "I was soft," Cynthia interrupted. "Then you poisoned me and left me to suffocate while my husband believed I was dead. That changed my perspective on violence." She tapped the screen. 3 minutes now. Decide. "It was just us," Minjun cried out, blood flecking his lips. "The 4 of us, no one else. We couldn't risk more people knowing. The plan was to take you out tonight, then stage it as an ambush by the Incheon crew. Start a war, consolidate power in the chaos. And my wife." Junisio's voice could have cut diamond. "Collateral damage. She made you weak. Made you care about things other than the organization." Minjun laughed, a wet, rattling sound. "We were saving you from yourself." Junisio stood, looked at Cynthia. She nodded once and tapped her tablet. "Ambulance is coming for him. They'll take him to a hospital we control. He lives or dies based on how useful his testimony is." She turned to Choi Dae-sung, still kneeling, and her expression was glacial. "You want to add anything? Or should I call your daughter's school and have them send her home to an empty house? Permanently?" Choi's jaw worked. The massive enforcer looked smaller somehow, diminished. "It was a mistake," he finally said. "We thought we were protecting the organization. We were wrong." "You were ambitious," Junisio corrected. "There's a difference." You saw an opportunity and took it. That's what we do in this world. I'd respect it if you hadn't used my wife as the opening move. What do you want? Choi asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I want you to call every lieutenant, every crew boss, every soldier in our organization, Junesio said. I want you to tell them that there's an emergency meeting at headquarters in 2 hours. Everyone attends. No exceptions. Cynthia pulled up another screen on her tablet. And while you're making calls, Director Beck can explain something to me. She turned to face the older man, who still stood against the doors like a cornered animal. You accessed my husband's private files 6 times in the last month. Financial records, offshore accounts, operational details. You were planning to take over completely, weren't you? Not just remove Junesio. Replace him. Beck's face twisted with contempt. This organization was built by Koreans for Koreans. Your husband's father understood that. The alliances, the traditions, the blood oaths, they mean something. Then you came along with your American ideas, your weakness, your... My what? Cynthia stepped forward, her voice deadly quiet. Say it. The word you're thinking. The real reason you wanted me dead. Beck's lip curled. You're a... Junesio's fist connected with Beck's jaw before the slur could fully form. A strike with 30 years of martial arts training behind it. Beck's head snapped back, cracking against the wooden door. He slumped to the floor, conscious but dazed, blood pouring from his nose. Finish that sentence and I'll kill you with my bare hands, Junesio said, his voice absolutely level. The only reason you're breathing is because my wife asked me to let the organization see justice done properly. Otherwise, I would have buried all 4 of you in these mountains and told everyone you died in the Incheon ambush you were planning to frame. Cynthia's hand found his, squeezed once. A silent reminder. They were in this together now. Control. Strategy. Not rage. Junesio took a breath, nodded. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Lee? I need you at Yongjusa Temple with a cleaning crew and a tech team. For packages to transport, one needs immediate medical. And Lee? Bring cameras. High quality. We're recording a confession. He ended the call and looked at his wife, really looked at her. She was thinner than she'd been. Shadows under her eyes that spoke of nights without sleep and days spent hunting. But she was here alive, standing in a temple surrounded by the men who tried to destroy them both, completely in command of herself and the situation. How long? He asked. How long have you been planning this? Since the moment I woke up in Dr. On's clinic and realized what they'd done, she said. I spent 3 days gathering evidence, hacking into systems, tracking their movements. I needed proof, not just suspicion. And I needed to know if you... She hesitated. If I was part of it, he finished for her. Yes. Her eyes held his. I had to be sure. It should have hurt, that lack of trust. But looking at what she'd survived, what she'd accomplished alone while he'd been falling apart at her grave, he only felt a fierce pride mixed with devastating guilt. I'm sorry I didn't protect you, he said. You couldn't have known. They were too close, too trusted. She glanced at the 4 men, various stages of defeated and broken. But now we know. And now we make sure everyone else knows too. Headlights swept across the temple windows. Lee's crew, arriving with professional efficiency. The next phase was beginning. Junesio laced his fingers through Cynthia's, feeling her pulse strong and steady against his palm. Together? He asked. Together, she confirmed. And then they went to reclaim their throne. The emergency meeting at headquarters had lasted 4 hours. Every lieutenant, every crew boss, every soldier who mattered had crowded into the main conference room and watched in stunned silence as the confessions played on the massive screens. Director Beck, broken and bleeding, admitting to conspiracy and attempted murder. Kim Min-jun wheezing through punctured lungs, detailing the poison and the plan. Choi Dae-sung and Park Sung-ho, confirming everything with the hollow voices of men who knew they were already dead. And then Cynthia had stepped into the room, alive and commanding, and the silence had turned electric. Junesio had stood beside her, his hand at the small of her back, and addressed his organization with a voice that brooked no argument. Anyone who has a problem with my wife, with her place at my side, with the way I choose to run this syndicate, you have 30 seconds to walk out that door. I will consider it your resignation, and you'll leave with your life. Stay and you accept that things have changed. That we have changed. No one had moved. Not one person. The 4 conspirators had been taken away to face the organization's justice, a process that would be neither quick nor merciful. Their families would be spared but stripped of rank and resources, exiled from Seoul. The message was clear. Betrayal would be punished absolutely, but the innocent would not suffer for the guilty. Now, 2 days after the temple, Junaseo and Cynthia stood at the gates of the same cemetery where this had all begun. It was early morning, the sun barely cresting the horizon, painting everything in shades of gold and shadow. The grounds were empty except for maintenance workers too far away to see clearly. They walked together in silence, hands clasped, until they reached the grave. The headstone was still there, marble and polished, bearing Cynthia's name and the dates that had marked her supposed death. The photograph still smiled from the stone, frozen in a moment of happiness that felt like it belonged to different people in a different lifetime. Junaseo stood before it, and this time there was no grief in his posture, no broken collapse. He was standing tall, shoulders back, the king of Seoul reclaiming his composure and his throne. I knelt here, he said quietly. I begged the earth to take me instead. I bargained with gods I don't believe in and ancestors I've dishonored. I was ready to burn everything down because without you, none of it meant anything. Cynthia squeezed his hand. I watched you. I stood behind that tree and watched you fall apart, and it nearly killed me all over again. I thought you were gone. He turned to face her fully. For 4 days, I believed the only good thing in my life had been taken, and I was ready to follow you into the dark. But I wasn't gone, she said. I was right here, hidden, afraid, trying to figure out if you were my husband or my murderer. And now, she reached up, cupped his face with both hands. Now I know exactly who you are. A man who would rather die than live without me. A man who built an empire on violence but cried at my grave like a child. A man who is absolutely terrifying and absolutely mine. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, gentle touches that contradicted everything the world knew about Kang Junaseo. Then he stepped back and pulled a sledgehammer from the bag he'd carried from the car. Cynthia's eyebrows rose. You brought a sledgehammer to a cemetery? I'm not leaving this here, he said, gesturing to the headstone. This monument to the worst 4 days of my life. This symbol of their victory, even though they failed. This grave that was supposed to be your final resting place. He hefted the hammer. I'm erasing it. The groundskeepers will. I own this cemetery, he interrupted. As of yesterday morning. I'll pay for the damage. But this. He swung the hammer, and it connected with the marble with a crack that echoed off the surrounding monuments. This ends today. Another swing. The photograph shattered, glass exploding outward. Another, and the name began to fracture and split. Cynthia watched, something fierce and approving in her expression as her husband systematically destroyed the marker of her false death. When the headstone was reduced to rubble and fragments, Junaseo dropped the hammer and stood breathing hard, his suit jacket discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his hands bleeding from the vibrations of the impacts. No more mourning, he said. No more hiding, she agreed. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Yes, I need the plot at section 7, row 12 cleared completely. Remove everything. Replace the soil. Plant grass. I want no trace that a grave was ever here. He paused. By tomorrow. I don't care what it costs. He ended the call and turned to Cynthia, who was smiling with something that looked like pride and vindication mixed together. What do we do now? She asked. Now we go home. Really home. Together. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist. We rebuild the organization the right way. We root out anyone else who thinks like Beck and his crew. We make it clear that you're not just my wife, you're my partner in everything. Equal. Untouchable. The old families won't like it. The old families can adapt or disappear. Their choice. His voice was iron and silk. I've learned something these past few days. Power without someone to share it with is just elaborate loneliness. I'd rather have you beside me and half the empire than everything without you. She leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. You're not getting half. You're getting all of it, and you're getting me. I'm done being the soft one, the outsider, the American wife who doesn't understand the business. I understand it perfectly now. And I'm going to help you run it better than it's ever been run. Together, he said, the word that had become their promise, their vow, their declaration of war against anyone who would try to separate them again. Together, she echoed. They stood there for a long moment, surrounded by the destruction of the false grave, the morning sun climbing higher and warming their skin. Around them the cemetery was waking up, but this corner, this spot where Junicio had nearly lost himself to grief, was being reclaimed and transformed. Finally, Cynthia pulled back and looked up at him. Take me home. Home, he repeated, and the word had weight now, meaning not just a place but a state of being. Home was wherever they were together, whether that was a penthouse in Hanamdong or a temple in the mountains or standing in a cemetery over the ruins of their enemies' plans. They walked back through the cemetery gates hand in hand, leaving the rubble behind them. A groundskeeper watched them pass, took in the destroyed headstone and the sledgehammer abandoned in the grass, and wisely decided to say nothing. There were some people you didn't question, and Kong Junesio and his resurrected wife had just become legends. By the time they reached the car, the story was already spreading through the organization's networks. The boss's wife wasn't dead. She'd come back like a ghost to destroy the traitors. They'd stood together in a temple and dismantled a coup with precision and ruthlessness. And now they were returning to headquarters, united, stronger than before, ready to reshape the entire syndicate in their image. Junesio opened the car door for Cynthia, something he always did, a small gesture of devotion in a life otherwise defined by brutality. She slid into the passenger seat, and he walked around to the driver's side. Before starting the engine, he reached across and took her hand again, brought it to his lips. I love you, he said in Korean, then English, making sure she understood in every language that mattered. 사랑해. I love you more than power, more than the empire, more than my own life. I know, she said, her eyes bright. I watched you prove it when you thought I couldn't see. And I love you the same way. Enough to come back from the dead. Enough to stand beside you in this world, even knowing what it costs. He started the engine, and the Maybach purred to life. As they pulled away from the cemetery, neither of them looked back. The past was destroyed, buried under broken marble and shattered lies. Ahead of them, Seoul glittered in the morning light, a city that belonged to them, an empire they would rule together. The king had been brought to his knees by grief, but he'd risen again, and this time he had a queen. The private rooftop garden of the Kong Holdings Tower had been Cynthia's addition to the building, installed 6 months before her supposed death. Junesio had thought it was frivolous at the time, a waste of premium real estate that could have been another conference room or executive office. Now, 3 months after the temple, he understood it differently. It was a sanctuary 42 floors above the violence and blood, a place where green things grew despite the concrete and steel, where the air smelled like jasmine instead of gun oil and fear. He found her there at sunset, as he often did these days. She was tending to the herbs she'd planted, her hands in the soil, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She'd traded the tactical gear for elegant business attire, a charcoal suit tailored to accommodate the holster she now wore as naturally as jewelry. The organization had learned quickly that Cynthia Morgankong was not decoration. She sat in on every major meeting, vetted every significant decision, and had personally restructured their money laundering operations to be 30% more efficient and significantly harder to trace. The old families had objected exactly once. Junesio had given them a choice: adapt or retire. Most had adapted. The ones who hadn't had found their territories quietly absorbed, their operations smoothly transferred to more progressive leadership. It had been bloodless, which was Cynthia's influence; efficient, which was Junesio's standard. Together, they'd reshaped the syndicate into something that honored tradition while refusing to be imprisoned by it. Mrs. Choi's trial concluded today, Junesio said, stepping onto the rooftop garden and closing the door behind him. Life sentence. No possibility of parole. Cynthia didn't look up from her herbs, just nodded. And the others? Beck died in prison last week. Heart attack, allegedly. They both knew it wasn't natural causes. Some debts could only be paid in blood. Park Sung-ho is serving 25 years. Kim Min-jun didn't make it out of surgery. And Choi Dae-sung? He's cooperating fully with the restructuring. His family has been relocated to Japan, set up with legitimate businesses. He'll spend the rest of his life working off his debt to the organization, but he'll live. Junisa moved closer, watching her hands work the soil. You could have ordered him killed. Everyone would have understood. His daughter is 8 years old, Cynthia said quietly. I spent 3 days watching him, learning his patterns, his life. I saw him pick her up from school, help her with homework, tuck her in at night. He's a monster in our world, but he's her father. She finally looked up, her eyes meeting his. I won't make children orphans unless there's no other choice. We have enough blood on our hands. This was the balance they'd struck. Junesio's ruthless efficiency tempered by Cynthia's strategic mercy. Her moral compass guiding decisions without making them weak. They'd become something new together, something the underworld had never quite seen before. Partners who genuinely loved each other while running an empire built on calculated violence. The Seoul families have requested a formal dinner, Junesio said, settling onto the bench beside where she knelt. Next month. They want to officially recognize you as co-head of operations. Cynthia sat back on her heels, a slight smile playing at her lips. That's their way of saving face while admitting they were wrong about the foreign wife. Essentially, yes. Will we go? That's your decision. You're the one they disrespected. You're the one they tried to have killed. His hand found hers, soil and all. I'll support whatever you choose. She was quiet for a moment, looking out over the Seoul skyline that stretched in every direction. A kingdom they ruled together now. We'll go. But on our terms. They hosted at our residence, not theirs. They come to us. And the dinner is catered by that black-owned restaurant in Itaewon. The one that serves fusion cuisine. Junesio's laugh was low and genuine. You want to make them eat Korean-American fusion food, while formally accepting you into their old guard traditions? I want them to understand that acceptance means actually accepting all of me, not just tolerating the parts that make them comfortable. She squeezed his hand. Besides, the food is excellent. If they can't appreciate it, that's their failure, not mine. You're brilliant, he said, pulling her close despite the dirt on her hands. Absolutely brilliant and slightly terrifying. I learned from the best. She kissed him, tasting like mint from the herbs she'd been trimming. When they separated, her expression had turned more serious. Do you ever regret it? The way things changed. Regret you being alive? Never. No, I mean, the organization. We've softened some edges. We've turned down deals that your father would have taken. We've prioritized differently. Some of the old guard thinks we're losing our edge. Junesio considered this, looking out at the city that had been his birthright and his prison. 3 months ago, I was on my knees at your grave, ready to burn the entire empire down because without you, it meant nothing. I learned something in those 4 days. Power for its own sake is empty. Money for its own sake is meaningless. The empire my father built was strong, but it was cold. Efficient but hollow. He turned to face her fully. What we're building now. It's different. We're creating something that can last beyond us, that doesn't require us to sacrifice everything human to maintain it. So no, I don't regret the changes. I regret that it took nearly losing you to understand what actually matters. Cynthia's eyes shimmered, but she blinked the tears back. They'd both cried enough. What do you think happens next? For us, I mean. We've survived the coup, restructured the organization, proven ourselves. What's the next chapter? We consolidate, Junesio said. We expand into legitimate businesses more aggressively. We use the syndicate's resources to build something that our children might inherit without it destroying them. Children, Cynthia repeated, the word hanging between them like a question. Someday, when we're ready, when the world we're creating is stable enough that they can choose their own path. He pulled her fully into his arms now, held her against his chest where she could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong. I want them to have what we didn't. Choices. Safety. The option to walk away from all of this if they want to. That's a dangerous dream for a mafia boss to have. I'm a dangerous man married to a dangerous woman. We can have whatever dreams we want. The sun was setting in earnest now, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The city lights were beginning to flicker on, thousands of them, millions of lives playing out in the sprawl below. Somewhere down there, deals were being made in their name. Territory was being protected under their authority. Money was flowing through channels they'd established. The empire continued, vast and complex in theirs. But up here, in the garden Cynthia had insisted on building, they were just two people who'd survived something that should have destroyed them and had come out stronger on the other side. No more secrets, Junesio said suddenly. That's my only rule going forward. We tell each other everything. Every threat, every doubt, every fear. What happened with Beck and the others? It happened because I kept you separate from the darker parts of the business. I thought I was protecting you. Instead, I made you vulnerable. And I should have told you about paying off Dr. On's daughter's debts, Cynthia admitted. I thought you'd handle it with violence, so I kept it quiet. Turns out that secret saved my life, but it could have just as easily gotten me killed. So yes, no more secrets. Full transparency. We're partners in everything or we're partners in nothing. Partners in everything, Junesio agreed. They sat together as the night deepened, the garden lights automatically activating to cast everything in a soft golden glow. Somewhere below, their security team was monitoring every entrance to the building. In the offices beneath their feet, their organization ran with the precision they'd instilled in it. Tomorrow there would be meetings and decisions and the thousand small violences that kept an empire functioning. But tonight there was just this. A man and a woman who'd found each other in the darkness, who'd survived betrayal and poison and grief, who'd chosen each other over power and safety and sanity. Cynthia pulled out her phone and queued up a song, the Bluetooth connecting to the hidden speakers throughout the garden. Louis Armstrong's voice filled the air, singing La Vie en Rose, the song that had played in Junesio's car when he'd first realized she might be alive. Dance with me, she said, standing and extending her hand. He took it without hesitation, pulled her close, and they swayed together under the stars and city lights, surrounded by growing things in a garden built on top of an empire built on blood. I love you, he murmured against her hair, in Korean and English, the languages of his heritage and her influence, both of them necessary to express what he felt. I love you, she replied, her arms tight around his neck. Even when you're terrifying. Especially when you're terrifying. They danced until the song ended and then through the next one and the one after that. Two people who'd been brought to their knees by loss and had risen together as something far more powerful than either had been alone. The king and queen of soul, ruling an empire and refusing to let it rule them. Below them, the city glittered like scattered diamonds. Above them, the stars watched, ancient and knowing. And between earth and sky, in a garden that shouldn't exist but did anyway, Kong Junesio and Cynthia Morgankong held each other and swayed to music only they could hear. Two souls who'd found their way back from death itself and had no intention of ever letting go again. The story could have ended at the cemetery with broken marble and shattered grief. Instead, it continued here, with jasmine and starlight and the quiet promise that some loves are strong enough to survive anything. Even in a world built on darkness, they'd found their light. And they would fight to keep it burning. Always. Together.